By the winter of 1982, Pink Floyd was no longer a band. It was a war zone. The roaring success of The Wall had left them emotionally bankrupt, but it was the bitter sessions for the final cut that finally snapped the spine of rock's most visionary collective. David Gilmour and Roger Waters, the twin engines of the Floyd sound, weren't even looking at each other. Waters, consumed by the ghost of his father and the horrors of war, had seized absolute control of the typewriter, treating the rest of the band as mere studio musicians. Gilmour openly loathed the new material, calling it cheap leftovers from The Wall. Waters fired back with a brutal ultimatum. It was his way or he was walking. The atmosphere was so toxic that the album credits famously read, "The final cut by Roger Waters, performed by Pink Floyd." Was this the moment Pink Floyd truly died? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Did the final cut feel like a genuine Floyd record to you, or was it just a Roger Waters solo project in disguise? To Roger Waters, the final cut wasn't just an album. It was his ultimate manifesto. But to David Gilmour and Nick Mason, it felt like a hostile takeover. Richard Wright, the band's brilliant keyboardist, had already been ruthlessly ousted during The Wall sessions, leaving a gaping hole in the band's sonic DNA. Now, Waters was holding the remaining members hostage with his creative tyranny. Gilmour, whose soaring guitar solos had provided the emotional ballast to Waters' cynical lyrics for over a decade, tried to push back. He argued that the music lacked the grand, collaborative textures that defined The Dark Side of the Moon and Wish You Were Here. But Waters wasn't listening. He was convinced that his words were the only thing that mattered. The studio became a revolving door of isolation. The members recorded their parts separately to avoid physical altercations. It begs the question, can a band truly survive when the lyrical genius decides the musical genius is entirely expendable? By 1985, the silence between the camps was deafening. Roger Waters honestly believed that without his concept-driven brain, the vehicle had run out of gas. In December of that year, he officially notified EMI and Columbia that he was leaving the band, famously declaring Pink Floyd a spent force creatively. Waters didn't just want to walk away, though. He wanted to put the beast down for good. He assumed that his departure would automatically dissolve the partnership. In his mind, he was Pink Floyd. The idea that David Gilmour and Nick Mason would dare to carry on under the moniker without him wasn't just absurd. To Waters, it was an insult to the legacy they had built. But Waters severely underestimated the quiet resolve of David Gilmour. When Gilmour made it clear that he had no intention of letting the name die, the stage was set for one of the most expensive, public, and deeply personal legal bloodbaths in rock history. Which side were you on back then? Did you think Waters had the right to kill the name, or were you rooting for Gilmour to keep the ship afloat? The battle shifted from the recording studio to the High Court of Justice. In 1986, Roger Waters launched a massive legal strike to officially dissolve the partnership and permanently block David Gilmour and Nick Mason from ever using the name Pink Floyd again. Waters' lawyers argued that the band was an empty shell, and that allowing the remaining members to tour under the name would be a fraud perpetrated on the public. Gilmour dug in his heels, armed with a fierce determination and the backing of the record labels who desperately wanted a lucrative Pink Floyd commodity over a solo Roger Waters. He fought back. The legal warfare tore apart what little brotherly bond remained. The two men traded vicious barbs through the British press, turning a legendary musical brotherhood into a sordid corporate custody battle. Look at the bands from that era who toured with only one or two original members. Do you think a name belongs to the main songwriter, or does it belong to whoever is left standing? While the lawyers' billable hours skyrocketed, David Gilmour and Nick Mason did something Waters never expected. They went back to work. In 1987, alongside a reinstated Rick Wright, they released A Momentary Lapse of Reason under the Pink Floyd banner. Waters was apoplectic. He publicly dismissed the album as a clever forgery, mocking the lyrics and claiming the band was just cashing in on a brand name. The ultimate insult came when both camps hit the road simultaneously. Waters was touring his solo album Radio KOS, playing intimate theaters, while Gilmour's Pink Floyd was filling massive football stadiums, flying the iconic inflatable pig, and pulling in millions of fans. The public had spoken. They wanted the sound, not just the concept. It must have been a bitter pill for Waters to swallow, watching his former bandmates conquer the world using the very name he tried to legally execute. Did you catch either of those competing tours in '87? Tell us in the comments if Gilmour's Floyd still had that magic without Roger at the helm. By the end of December 1987, the legal war finally ground to a halt. On a rainy night aboard David Gilmour's houseboat Studio, the Astoria, the two warring factions signed a formal settlement. Waters surrendered his legal claim to the Pink Floyd name, while Gilmour and Mason agreed to pay him royalties for the brand and the rights to The Wall concepts. It was a cold, corporate truce, but the emotional scars were permanent. For the next 18 years, the silence between Waters and Gilmour was absolute. The creative partnership that defined a generation was buried under a mountain of resentment, pride, and legal paperwork. They had become strangers who shared a legendary past, completely unwilling to bridge the chasm. It takes a monumental amount of stubbornness to walk away from that kind of history. Looking back, do you think the separation actually preserved their legacy, preventing them from making mediocre albums together in the '90s, or did it rob us of more masterpieces? Then came the summer of 2005. To the shock of the entire music world, Bob Geldof achieved the impossible. For the Live 8 benefit concert in London's Hyde Park, he managed to broker a temporary ceasefire. For one night only, Roger Waters, David Gilmour, Nick Mason, and Rick Wright stood on the same stage for the first time in 24 years. When they launched into Comfortably Numb, it felt like time itself stood still. The chemistry was undeniably there, the old magic flickering back to life under the stadium lights. As the final notes faded, Waters pulled a visibly hesitant Gilmour into a group hug. It was a profoundly moving image of reconciliation for millions of fans worldwide. But behind the scenes, the old fractures hadn't healed. Rehearsals had been plagued by the same arguments over arrangements and control that had doomed them decades earlier. It was a beautiful illusion, a final gift to the fans, but it was nothing more than a ghost passing through. Did you watch that Live 8 performance live? Did it give you hope for a full reunion album? Or did you know deep down it was a one-time only miracle? The death of keyboardist Rick Wright in 2008 permanently shattered any lingering dreams of a true four-piece Pink Floyd reunion. But any hope for even a casual friendship between the two surviving titans evaporated completely in the years that followed. What began as a clash of musical egos in the 1980s mutated into a toxic, deeply personal feud played out over global politics, social media, and the ownership of the band's legacy. Today, the animosity is as bitter as it has ever been. Gilmour and Waters don't just avoid each other, they trade scorched-earth insults in the press, ensuring that rock's greatest partnership remains permanently frozen in ice. The music they made together changed the world, but the men who made it can no longer find a single square inch of common ground. Pink Floyd gave us the soundtrack to our lives, but their story reminds us that even the most brilliant light can be snuffed out by pride. Where do you stand today? When you spin those classic records, do you hear the genius of Roger Waters or the soul of David Gilmour? Let's settle it in the comments below.